So welcome here on, I was hoping would be a really lovely sunny London June day in London, but it's a bit grey, but there we go. Hopefully summer will be here tomorrow. I'm Becky, for those of you who don't know me, and I volunteer here as the events curator at the fantastic St Bride Foundation. If you aren't aware, we host talks like these to help fund the upkeep of our fantastic Grade 2 listed Victorian building, management and conservation of our unique and irreplaceable library collections, and running of our print workshop and learning programme. So just by being here, you're doing a really good thing to help this fantastic place run for future generations to enjoy, and of course current ones too, so thank you very much for supporting us. We are, of course, live streaming this event, and we have not so far had a problem with live streaming. But if for any reason there is an issue with the tech, we are recording the lecture. So for anyone online, if it all goes completely wrong, please know that we will send you the recording link when the lecture's over. So if, all fails and you can't watch it, or your computer blows up, or your cat sits on it and does something crazy, we will be recording this so you won't miss out on anything. If anyone on Zoom is having troubles their end and it's not our fault, do try just turning your computer off and on again by calling the IT crowd. That's probably what they tell you to do. So please just do that, and it generally does work. But if you have any further problems, do just let us know on the chat in the Zoom box, or whatever, chat box in Zoom, sorry, I'll get my words around the right way in a minute. I just have a few more things to say before I hand over to Paul, so please do bear with me. For anyone in the room, please can you just make sure your phones are on silent? We don't mind photographs, but please just turn the flash off because it interrupts the speakers and distracts them. And for anyone online, please can you also just make sure you're muted? So thank you very much for doing that. For anyone in person, if there is a fire, which we're hoping there will not be, there'll be one continuous alarm bell. And I'm sorry to anyone who's heard this 100 times, you're going to have to hear it again for health and safety reasons. So if there's a fire alarm, one continuous bell will direct you through this door here, hopefully, and through reception, and the meeting point is out in the courtyard area. If the fire's in reception, we'll direct you out one of the other doors down here, out through the back, down the steps, round past the theatre bar, up on the street, and we'll direct you around there. So hopefully you're prepared for every eventuality. This is actually our last talk for the summer, before the summer hopefully kicks in. But we have got lots of really exciting events coming in September. And a lot of our things in September are things that I think the typographic people in the room, who are obviously all of you, will be really excited about. We've got lots of speakers flying in from outside of the UK, so do keep an eye out. We've got some really brilliant things happening. So we'll be announcing those as soon as we can. And also, this is an exclusive for this evening. We are really delighted to announce that our conference is back this year in September on the 28th. So again, we're going to be announcing that really, really soon. And we've got a day packed with really brilliant speakers, and last year was the first one we held after a 12-year break, and it was just really brilliant, and we've had so much good feedback. So we are bringing it back again. So again, do keep your eye out on our social media and website for things like that. And if you also love typographic things that are happening next week and not just today at St Bride, our friend Jeremy Tankard is hosting a free talk as part of his typeface launch next Wednesday, the 19th of June at the Art Workers Guild. Tickets are free, and you can just find out more on his Instagram page or on Eventbrite. And I'm nearly done, I promise. And if you weren't aware, this building holds an incredible collection known as the St Bride Library, which houses many typographic design and printing treasures from the times of the ancient Egyptians up to the present day. What's more, you can see them up close and personal every Wednesday if you book an appointment in our reading room. You'll just have a hard time deciding what to look at from the thousands of items in our collection. We also hold letterpress and wood engraving workshops for all levels and experience, so you can also do a tour of our labyrinthine building. There's so much going on, you'll never want to leave, and I know that's very true because I still haven't been here for a very long time volunteering. So if you'd like to do more, you can find about all of this on our website. And finally, you'll be glad to know I'm nearly done. I'm really happy to be introducing Paul Shaw to you all this evening. Paul is a designer and design historian. He has taught calligraphy, typography, the history of graphic design, and the history of type in various New York area universities and art schools since 1980. He is the author of Helvetica and the New York City subway system and revival type, the co-author of Black Letter, Type and National Identity, and the editor of The Eternal Letter, 2 Millennia of the Classical Roman Capital. For the last 3 years, he has been researching type specimens both online and at collections in New York, Chicago, and San Francisco. And Paul actually is giving another talk tomorrow night at the Art Workers Guild, and it's on the calligraphy and lettering of W.A. Dwiggins. So if you just haven't got enough Paul this evening, you can hear him again tomorrow night at the Art Workers Guild. And that's from 6:30 p.m. And it's all the information for that is on the Letter Exchange website. So I am really delighted to be handing over Paul. Thank you very much. And over to you. Thank you. You need that one, this one.
Oh. Thank you, Becky. Thank you, Bob and Sophie, who's not here tonight, for inviting me. Or I sort of invited myself, and they agreed, which was very nice, because Jeremy Tankard asked me to come and give a talk on Dwiggins, and I thought, if I'm doing all this type specimen research, I have to come to St. Bride and share some of it. This is going to be just a little taste of what I've gotten into. This talk is really about what type specimens say, much more than the typefaces in them. And I'm sure most of you are like I used to be. I just look at the books and just flip to the really cool looking letters and skip what they were saying. But I started discovering all sorts of strange things. The title here, From Cicero to Spoonie Highdiddel, Ladies Cicerone. That's the Italian pronunciation, though I think in Philadelphia they might have said Cicerone, for all I know. But Spoonie Highdiddel shows up in, unfortunately, very tiny size of type in several type specimens, starting with McKellar Smith's and Jordan and a couple others. And because it has Cicero in the name, I figured it was a good lead to go from Cicero, who most of us think of as one of the key texts in type specimens, to Spoonie. It's not advancing like it should.
I think it might be that one. Oh, no, it's
No, it worked before.
There we go.
That one? Okay. So this is what a lot of type specimens sort of look to us like, just random words thrown about. This one I actually find quite funny, even though I don't read German. I just see hell dog, good hell dog. But tonight I'm going to skip a lot of these. I mean, you can find lots of unintentional humor, or at least I think it's unintentional. It could be intentional, but from the composers. This is a wood type specimen from William Schumacher, which I believe is either online or there's a copy at the Letterform Archive. So where we start with typefaces and what they say is the earliest specimens. And Updike says that the type founders used two things. They did the Ave Maria, which we'll see from Ratdolt, the first known type specimen, and the Paternoster. Well, in what I've been looking at, I don't really find the Paternoster until centuries after what Updike says. Whoops, I'm sorry to go so fast. So this is the first known type specimen, 1476 by Erhard Ratdolt of Augsburg, Germany. And it's just a broadside. And you can see in the upper left, that's the Ave Maria. And then you've got continuations of the text, and in the lower right, you've got him telling you when he did it and where. So it's a very accurately dated specimen. I've pointed to the Latin because it is not what Updike says. It's not what we expect. It's not Cicero. It's not any of those classical authors. This is the specimen that the Vatican put out in 1628, which is still one of the very first ever. It's not the very first, it's in book form. There's one from Plantin. But in here, we're seeing religious texts. But it's not the Ave Maria, it's not the Paternoster. And this particular page, I think, is a typeface from Garamond, because the Vatican did own some typefaces from the French punch cutters. This is the famous Eggenolf-Berner specimen, the one that helps to identify types cut by Garamont and Grandjean. The copy is not the best because the original was destroyed during World War II. And so this is based on an image that was made, I think, in the 1920s. But as you can see, we don't have Cicero in the text at the top, where I put the arrow. We've got other Latin texts. And to keep this from getting too long tonight, I'm not going to tell you what all the details are. This is a type specimen that's buried in a book about how to do printing. Not all type specimens are simply issued by typefounders. Ratdolt was a printer, and he issued a type specimen because he had to show customers the typefaces he made, as well as those that he printed. The Vatican, of course, was inventorying the types they had for their various printing projects. But this guy, George Furman, did a book in 1616, and it's a book about printing, but it has like 20 pages of type specimens in it, both black letter or fraktur. Here I've shown Schwabacher, and you can see in the Roman, it's Ecclesiastes. So there's a lot of religious texts that people were choosing. They just don't seem to be the Ave Maria or the Pater Noster, as Updike says, which surprises me. This specimen, which is a lovely one, I just like that combination of capital Roman M's and Schwabacher, fraktur M in the middle at the top. I mean, you see sizes like that in late 19th century typefounder specimen books, and they're trying to explain how you can align typefaces of different sizes. I'm not sure if that's what Voskins was doing here. This is another broadside, and I pointed to another religious text that's in there. Now this one is all about God in height in German, so I guess it's the Lord's Prayer. And when you look at these specimens, there's so many texts to look at because every size of type is often a different text. I mean, you'll find specimens later where they just repeat the same words over and over again. And those can be quite boring. Somebody did an article online recently called The Death of Type Specimens. And he was looking at Australian specimens, and it got to a point, like in 1912, where all they said was their name over and over again, page after page. I don't think he looked at very many things besides Australian type specimens, because there were certainly interesting ones after 1912 in other countries. Whoops, I jumped. This is a Schreibschrift, as it says, which is a current shrift. A current shrift is a running script, and it's one that was still being taught in Germany in the 20th century. It's a very hard to read style. The lowercase e is just two slanted parallel lines. But here you're seeing another text from the Bible. And I'm trying to show you stuff from multiple countries. And so I'm going to go through this both chronologically but also thematically. So I'll go backward and forward. This is a religious section, and I wanted to see what did people do. And fortunately, with computers today, we can type in foreign languages if we don't know them and get at least a rough idea of what the text is, and maybe even the source. So if you don't know Dutch, which I don't, or German, type it in, and most of the time I found things. This is about Carolus Magnus. Might not be a name you recognize. It's Charlemagne. So we've got a text, and this is from the Fleischmann, the Enschede foundry in Haarlem, Holland, which employed Johann Fleischmann. And what's amazing about one of their specimen books is they identify the typefaces that Fleischmann cut for them and provide you the year. This one does not have that, but you'll see in the same specimen other pages that do identify Mr. Fleischmann. And he did this very Baroque black letter. Okay, now we've got an English sample. The Fan Street Foundry, which was William Thorogood's foundry that he took over from Robert Thorne when Thorne died in 1819, I believe it was. And we've got Genesis, which I've rarely seen. But here's Genesis for his great primer number 1. Beautifully designed page. So it's not surprising we're finding texts from the Bible. I mean, the Bible is so common in every culture in Europe. But it's interesting that we're seeing English and not Latin. And the reason people talk about Latin being in specimens is that there's an idea that Latin is easier to make look good in a specimen because you have fewer ascenders and descenders. And you have more letters that have similar shapes, H-U-M-N. You don't have Y's, no K's, so German and English are terrible. And we'll see a typefounder who fights against that idea. Miller and Richard was a Scottish foundry with a branch in London by this point. This is circa 1860. This is what people call a modern typeface in the 19th century, meaning it was not the old style of Caslon and people like that. And this sort of type is everywhere in specimens. It can drive you blind looking at some of these specimens. This is a beautiful page, but it's St. Stephen's Day. I don't know if it's meant something special to Miller and Richard or just, text. And that's one of the things. We don't know whether or not the people were choosing text just because they were handy or available, or they had some meaning. There's some where I believe there is some definite meaning and not just, random, choice of words or text, whatever happens to be around. But other ones you will see are probably random. So one thing Miller and Richard is famous for is old style type, which was an attempt in the middle of the 19th century to go back to Caslon types. But when they were making these types, they made them have the same high contrast that the modern types had, but they changed the shading, the modeling to be that of Caslon. It's a problem, the name, because to Americans, old style means Caslon, but to the British, that's old face. And this typeface was cut by Alexander Feemister, who ended up working in the United States and being an important type engraver, type cutter. But you see here, there's the paternoster. And that is the first time I was able to find the paternoster. It doesn't mean there aren't earlier versions. When I say that a lot of the stuff is the first time, it means the first time that I've seen it in all the things I've looked at. And there are thousands of type specimens. St. Bride's collection, I've been working primarily with Columbia's collection, which belonged to the American Typefounders. And I don't know how big St. Bride's is. I know that Columbia's is over 2,000 specimens, along with other stuff. And I've been looking also at things that have been digitized. Because when I started this, looking at specimens in the middle of the pandemic, in the summer of 2020, I was just curious at what there was in the way of digitized specimens. And I found about 300, which astonished me. Well, at my last count, there's maybe 3,000. Because in the last couple of years, major collections have put their works online. St. Bride has put everything of theirs up to 1830 online, which I heartily applaud. A couple libraries in Germany have put a huge amounts of specimens online. And a library in Paris several years ago did excellent scans of the stuff they have. It's called the Bibliothèque Fournie. And they finally allowed you to download the stuff. It was blocked at first. So if you want to do some further exploration on your own, there are a lot of options. Don't go to Google Books versions unless you just want at least some sample, because the quality is quite poor. Here's the Lord's Prayer. You can see it's there in English, and it's also there in Latin. But this book is from a type founder in Berlin in 1879. That's the only other Lord's Prayer I found. The man I've been mentioning, if people aren't familiar, Updike, was Daniel Berkeley Updike. He was a printer in Boston, considered the best printer in his time in the United States. And he was what people call an amateur scholar. They don't mean the word amateur negatively, it's just that his business was to print. But when he had time, he went and researched printing and type history, and he wrote a 2-volume book in 1922, which today is still considered like the best source on the history of printing, despite all the flaws in it. It got reissued in 1939 with some updates, and reprinted in 1961. You can find it on Google Books if you want to just download it, or you can find copies probably reasonably priced. But Updike, I don't know what he was looking at. I mean, he collected a lot of stuff because it's in the Providence Public Library, a lot of the specimens that he owned. So, I think he knew a lot, but I'm just surprised that he stated that the paternoster was what everybody was using. All right, so that was the religion. From there, we can kind of go to proverbs, morals, maxims, epigrams, aphorisms. In other words, short phrases that have some sort of, educational value, whether religious or ethical. And those come and go in specimens. Sometimes they just sprinkle around. Other times they seem to dominate. And I think one reason when they dominate is that they're short. Because if you look at specimens, you'll start seeing how the design reflects the growth of typefaces, the sheer number, but also the growth of typefaces in terms of size. As books go from, as types go from being designed for books to newspapers to posters to ephemeral graphic design. This is James Watson, a printer in Edinburgh, and I haven't looked at his history of printing. I've been trying to see a copy. I'm sure St. Bride has one. It's a tiny little book, and the type in it is quite awful. It's pre-Caslon. So if you want to know why Caslon's a big deal, here's an example of what type was like in England. But look what it says. It is the ill fortune of a strong brain, that's a long S in strong, if not to be dignified as meritorious, to be depressed as dangerous. And there's several other similar things if you skim through this tiny book. Here we've got a French maxim. Was it those who want to be masters of their passions must find repose? Oh, my French is terrible. In all the world that they search, and they sees for the good, you must love to see the good, you must love the good, be good. It is not enough, isn't that enough as a philosophy of life? This is actually a foundry not in Paris or France, despite the French here, but this is Guillaume Haas in Munkenstein outside of Basel, Switzerland. And the Haas foundry didn't close down till the 1970s. So, and it started in, 1760, one of the longest. And they're the foundry that made the original version of Helvetica. This is the same company long before Helvetica. Oh, I should have had my notes just to translate this. Let me see if I can look at my notes. Because I translated the German. Sorgen, Morgen. Where was it? Oops, next page. Sorgen, Morgen, pardon my German pronunciation, Freude, heute, worries tomorrow, joy today. It's a very nice typeface. It kind of looks like modern 20 for those who know their modern types from the 19th century. Philosophy, oh, I misspelled philosophy, excuse me. Literature and culture. This is sort of a grab-all where the founders would have texts from famous authors or some who were famous in their day, not famous anymore, though many of them you can look up online, luckily, as well as cultural references to museums, to art exhibitions, to artists, and also references to philosophers. The Manual Typographique is a specimen from Fournier-le-Jeune. It's one of two volumes that he did in 1764, 66, a couple years before he died. And if you don't know Fournier Lejeune, he's a contemporary of Baskerville and a contemporary of Caslon and Fleischmann. And yet, Anglo-American audiences all know about Baskerville as a new change from the style of Caslon, and they ignore people like Fournier, who was far more radical than Baskerville. The name of the typeface, philosophy, oi, serre, he made typefaces with different sizes of counters. So he has some typefaces that he calls a gras, or big counter, others are petite, oi. So he was actually doing sort of optical characters, not just for different sizes, but even for the same size and different x heights. But here's a philosophical thing. The word philosophy is a size of type. There were different sizes of types in different countries. Some of them are pretty much the same, the words, like minion. Other words are different. On the continent, you'll find Cicero, which is the equivalent of our pica, roughly. And philosophy, I think the equivalent of our long primer. But the text is all the men live as they have. Oh, my French is just not the best. The text that he's saying is from a Dutch book, as far as I could tell, 1739, though there's a Paris 1740 edition. And it's a man named Charles Francois Nicolas Lemaitre de Claville. And he's talking about the merits of men and considering all of their ages. Here we've got Marcus Aurelius, often considered the philosopher of all the Roman emperors. This is from the Gravenhage, the foundry in Gravenhage, which was copying typefaces that Enschede had Fleischmann do. And when you start looking at specimens, you'll see a lot of imitation. It's actually quite a nice, I kind of like this typeface. There was also a punch cutter in Brussels who was copying Fleischmann, Rosart. Beside Marcus Aurelius, you're going to find references to Plato, to Diogenes, to Pythagoras, to Plutarch, to Seneca. You notice I haven't mentioned Cicero? The University of Oxford did a specimen in 1768. And it's not surprising they would do something philosophical. And it's a university, classical learning. And they've got many Latin texts. And much to my surprise, despite the date of 1768, there's no Cicero. This is Demosthenes' Marathon Oration number 4. Here's our first American example. This is a book that I just looked at a few months ago for the first time and was astonished. It's the last specimen that the Bruce Foundry did in New York. And at this point, they had sold out to some of their employees. So it's both the Bruce Foundry and it's not the Bruce Foundry. But calling it the Bruce Foundry is better for keeping your customers. And when I started flipping through a copy at the Grolier Club, I swear I was in the theater because it's like 100 pages that have constant quotations from Shakespeare. I mean, just read this, mentally, and think about, declaiming this as an actor. I desire no more, do you prepare the body? How weak a thing, O Brutus! Hear me, for I will speak. Do you mind? All of a sudden you got Cockney in there with Shakespeare. I don't think that's Shakespeare, that last one. There's a lot of Richard III, a lot of Julius Caesar, which is strange. There's not much in the way of Hamlet, or Romeo and Juliet, or even Macbeth. It's interesting what they chose. This is a wood type from Harold & Sons. We just had lunch over at Harold & Sons restaurant a few blocks away, which is on the site, I guess, of one of the Harold & Sons offices. And this is wood type. Why they call it Turkish, I have no idea. You'll find that the names of typefaces are peculiar. That's a whole another talk. But that's a really cool Hamlet. It's just so wacky. Circa 1890, which makes sense. I mean, the end of the Victorian era, you find lots of crazy designs. The Star family was a major family in early American type founding. There were several members, and they had foundries in several cities, and one of them was first sent from New York to go spy on a Philadelphia foundry to learn the secrets. If you read about them, they're quite fascinating. They failed in Pittsburgh. This is R Star, not E Star, or a couple others. And he was briefly in Albany, New York, which is the capital of New York State. And so, what you're seeing, is not only his name there at the bottom, but you're seeing Cicero. Quousque tandem, abutere, Catiline, pazienza, nostra, etc. That's the famous Cicero quote. And we'll go back to its origins a little later. But below it, he's got a quote which I believe is from Milton. Let me just check my notes. Yes, from Milton's Paradise Lost, Book 5, which I think he copied from a specimen that Edmund Fry in London had done a couple years earlier. This is 1826, 1824. Fry has the exact text. And I suspect that some of the texts were copied from one founder to another. That they didn't go and look them up, in some old book. And a lot of times I think that when they were quoting a classical author, at least the Americans were probably getting their sources from compilations. Somebody would do a book that was famous quotations, famous essays for school children to learn. And they would, take stuff, I think, from some of those and not from the original sources. But Milton is a favorite of a number of type founders, and I think it's because he did a defense of freedom of the press. Because you'll realize that type founders and printers were like the most educated of working men. Because they were setting type all the time, or looking at type and proofreading it, they were sort of self-taught. So you're going to have a Spanish specimen. This is a foundry I'm not familiar with in Seville. You have to, of course, have Cervantes, Don Quixote. And one of the things in this talk is that there's a lot of nationalism in choosing texts. The Spanish would prefer Cervantes, the Germans Goethe. I would have thought the English Shakespeare, but it doesn't seem to be that common. The French Molière. This is an amazing book, which is here at St. Bride. I found it online. It's a book from a printer, not a type founder. So you've got printers making typefounders making specimens so they can show their wares to a printer. You have printers making specimens so they can show what they own to a potential customer. These are the types you can print your book, your invitation, whatever it is in. Well, this book the entire book is a travelogue of going to the United States from this Glasgow printer who printed for some of the major foundries in Scotland. And I could not find this text online, but I could find other texts like it a decade earlier, but they were not the same. They were similar. And this guy apparently did go to the United States. I thought maybe he just copied it from somebody else, but I found some newspaper things that said Mr. Hedderwick is leaving for New York today. And he talks about what the United States was like. It's really a fun book to read. And you can read it at the St. Bride copy online. So I hope you're reading some of this as I'm telling you about the specimens. This specimen by a type founder in Naples, not a very beautiful one, but I've tried to put the arrows to read, and even here I'm having a little bit of trouble. This is all about Ulysses and the Odyssey. If you can see Telemachus's name on the left where the red arrow is, and you can see him again on the right, and Nestor on the right. And it turns out it's a French text from like the 1820s. And other type founders seem to take stuff from this same Telemachus, Odysseus text, which surprised me. Crowitz and Son we saw earlier for that German paternoster. This is a little bit, well, we don't really know when this thing was done. This is one of these volumes in Germany where it's got a big long date because there are materials in it that could be earlier and could be later. So rather than trying to pin the date down, they're just saying, look, this is possibly a collection over 10, 20 years. But this is from the same book. One about Ulysses and Telemachus. This is Calypso, who is one of the sirens or whatever. I read my Odyssey in high school. Letters made out of people were not the reason that I brought this up, even though they're always fun to see. A little bit ugly, or that word hotel with things. But I'm looking at fractus illibit and trying to figure out what fractus illibit is. And now where'd it go? This one, this is from Horace. So, if you're choosing Latin to make your type look good, why does it have to be Cicero? I mean, there's so many famous Roman authors: Cicero, Horace, Seneca, Plutarch, Julius Caesar, Livy. I've always been curious, why Cicero? And here's Horace. It's just it's one line. If you look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 lines of the same text. And one of the strange things about type specimens is you see these classical texts, and when they were first doing them, it made sense because they were small typefaces. The books they were doing were going to be possibly printed in Latin for a number of centuries. But all of a sudden, in the 19th century, you start to see these Latin texts used for commercial phrases and for typefaces that are really goofy. I mean, would you really want to be setting Horace in some of these typefaces if you know Horace's odes? I apologize for the small size here. I put two different things together. And that's because what you're seeing is, at the top, a specimen from Alexander Wilson and Sons, which was in Edinburgh with a branch in London, from 1842. And below it is an undated specimen, probably 1870, by the Lindsay family in New York. Well, the Lindsays were Scottish. And we don't know too much about exactly where they studied in Scotland. I've gotten nowhere. We know they came from Scotland in the 1850s, 1860s. But there are several pages in one of their books that are identical in text to those by Wilson. So I'm thinking one of two of them might have worked for Wilson before they came to the US. Their specimens are among the dullest visually, the Lindsays. We've jumped a long way to 1924 and to France to a typeface called Quousque, which was a very popular face in what we think is the Art Deco era with these really tall ascenders, short descenders. And we have a text all about the contemplative life that comes from a book of aphorisms from a French author who was alive in the 18th century. I wasn't really expecting to put Futura into this, but when I looked at the very first specimen of Futura, this is the second one, 1929, which has the first additional weights. There's a text that's from an American author. I have no idea. I mean, this is the American version of the specimen because Bauer had a sales office in New York, and so that helped the sales of Futura because European types and English and American types have different heights. So there's a problem. If you want to use a European type in England or America, you have to have it specially milled, or you have to hope that they have an office to distribute types. And Bauer had one in New York, so they did their own versions of specimens, but they were printed in Germany, despite being in English. And this text came out of American Fashion magazine. See if I can tell you I found the text because some of the fashion magazines are fortunately digitized. It's called, it's Arthur Schnitzler. It's not even, he's actually he's Viennese. But he wrote for the Americans. Word and Echo, a collection of animated versions on the artist, the theory of abstract art and dramatic art in Vanity Fair, 1928. So this was a very contemporary text to be sticking into this magazine. That's the text on the right. Most of what's on the right is the same until you get, I think, to New Incorporation, or modern step in smartness. So everything up until that is part of the same text. Sometimes they'll take a text and they'll just keep continuing the text as they change point sizes. By the way, who knew that there was an FT ligature in Futura on the right? Okay, we got into Cicero. And the reason Cicero is famous is because it's in William Caslon's first type specimen of 1734. But you can find Cicero, other texts of his, and other specimens. So this is from that Bruce specimen that has all the Shakespeare quotes. So what is Cicero? Shall we sound him too? I don't think that's about Cicero and the first oration. This is more about Cicero, I think, in the Julius Caesar play. Name him, but I love it. Name him not. Indeed, he is not fit. And then you got the ashing and the ton for Americans is clearly George Washington. The W is missing. We'll get to historical figures. So the first thing I was able to find historically that had a Cicero text is the small specimen book that Plantin in Antwerp did in 1567, which is one of the earliest specimens, and it's, I think, the first one that's actually not a broadside, but an actual, very short, bound book, with typefaces by Garamond. This one's definitely by Garamond. But this is from a Cicero text called Sentiarum. And here is our famous Caslon specimen. There are actually like 8 different versions, but this is the original 1734 in Chiswell Street in London. And once you get into the text, below all those ABCDs, you see on the left, Quousque, tandem, abutere, Catiline, and that's all it says until you get to the Greek and the Hebrew. The question to me is, why did Caslon choose this text? Because this text is all about an attempt to overthrow sort of democracy in ancient Rome. It's a plot. A friend of mine in New York, a letterpress printer, made a version of this text recently, and he changed it to O Donaldo instead of O Catalina, referring, of course, to our orange-haired wannabe president. And I thought, maybe there was something happening in England, and Caslon was sneaking in some political statement here. I haven't found anything, unless he was unhappy with the first George I, the first Hanover, the first king who came to England. He was German and couldn't speak English. But I can't quite see that would be the reason. Some people say it's because Caslon wanted the cue for a nice, fancy, long tail. But look at that very first Quousque. That's the stubbiest tail you've ever seen. It's like those dogs with little tiny tails on their back. I can't believe that's the reason. I have no idea why Caslon chose it. But once he did, he set off a sort of stampede to do Cicero's first oration against Catiline. It didn't happen immediately. Baskerville, who always claimed that he was going to simply improve Caslon a little bit. Caslon was good, but he's just going to fix it up. He chose the second oration against Catiline. And I'm sure that was a deliberate choice. He was not going to choose what Caslon did, but, the same author, the same set of texts. What we have on the right is an American foundry in Philadelphia. And there you're seeing this text that we think of should be classical, good for books, like Baskerville. And here it is in a fat face. the trend that the British founders started around 1806, 1803. And I just love seeing Cicero with a manicule, a fist, a pointing hand. I can't imagine Cicero and a pointing hand together. I've kept a lot of these in the orientation that they are in the book, rather than rotate them. So I apologize if you have to turn your head. This one I put in because the size of the typeface is called Trafalgar, which is a size that only appeared for a few years, but clearly in honor of Nelson's victory at Trafalgar. But it's Quousque tandem. And then, of course, we're now in the era of types intended for advertising, commercial stuff, and trade. So we've got cities like Northumberland, Beaconsfield. We've got numbers, pound signs. It's a very weird combination to be seeing Cicero in this context, but there's plenty of specimens like this. Oh, that was Blake, Garnett and Company, which ended up being Stevenson Blake in Sheffield. And they're the ones who bought up William Caslon, the fourth foundry in 1819. There's two branches of Caslons at this point. Here is Blake, Garnett and Company, and they have Cicero, nice border, and then they've got Isaiah. So they're mixing the Bible and they're along with the classical author, English and Latin. This one from one of the minor founders, Hugh Hughes, you look at it and you think, okay, this is just all commercial stuff until you get to the very bottom. There's Cicero. They can't help themselves. I mean, this is a corn exchange. Whoops, did I skip one? No. This is James Ronaldson, who was a successor to Binney and Ronaldson, who are often considered the first type founders in America, though there's two people who did maybe one sheet before them, but they're considered the first major foundry. They were Scottish immigrants. James Ronaldson was Ronaldson's son, and he took over the foundry after Binney retired and his father died. And in 1816, he's got what the British people are doing. Why not? But in the 1820s, he's going to change. And notice he has a dollar sign. But you will find pound signs in American specimens long after our revolution. I don't know why. We're not using pounds. So you kind of wonder, what did Bedoni do? Well, why not? I mean, he was Italian. Cicero was Roman, Italian. So here's Quousque tandem. That's real Bedoni. May not look like what you're used to. 1818, a book done by his widow. He died in 1813, but he was designing it and preparing it before then. So it's essentially his work. For a while, Bedoni had several people who were helping him. They were the Amoretti. Well, it says Fratelli Amoretti here, but there was also, I think, a cousin, from what I understand. And they had some sort of falling out with Bedoni. They set up their own foundry in a small town outside of Parma, where Bedoni was. 1811, they did their book, and that's their book on the left. And that one, just has, an aphorism. When they did their next specimen 20 years later, they gave in to Cicero. What about the French? This is Laurent and de Berny, the foundry that Honoré Balzac, the author, was involved in early in his career. Lost money apparently on it. Very important foundry. But here is, in their French version of a fat face, the Quousque tandem. Here it is from Spain. So this man we saw earlier with Cervantes, same specimen book. Here's a German one. This is Trowitz and Son again from Berlin. We've seen two things of theirs. Oh, just go back. Sometimes there's some very strange names. The name of this typeface is Narrow English Aldine Type. It has nothing to do with Aldus Manutius, despite the name. This German one has not only Cicero, but you're seeing it in black letter and in a sloped black letter, because black letter doesn't usually have italic. But that second specimen line is a sloped black letter, along with the fourth one. And then, strangely enough, Ronaldson in 1816, we just saw, he did Cicero in black letter, Fraktur. It's translated into German. Now you say, why German in Philadelphia? Because there were German immigrants. Philadelphia was one of the major cities with German immigrants. Wells, whose foundry became the Cincinnati Type Foundry, one of probably the most Western foundry in the United States this early in the 1820s, he translated Cicero into English and gave it a backslope. Not a lean to the right like the Germans, but a backslope. And several others copied this, or at least did the same thing. At the top it says Cicero's fourth oration against Catiline. I looked it up, there's only 3 orations. This is the first. Typo, mistake, I don't know, but it's the first. Translated into English. This is a specimen of printers, booksellers in London, and they probably had some Caslon type because they knew the Strongs. And you can see a different text. Theirs is, I've lost my place. Oh, theirs is the first, theirs is Cicero's first oration against Catiline, but they're not starting with the Quousque tandem part. They've just jumped further along in the text. Baskerville again. This is online from Harvard University. And he's got the second oration, which starts tandem aliquando. So you don't get that cue. That's what you want. There's Brockhaus choosing a different Cicero quote. And now we get to a text that, at least for a while in the United States, rivals Cicero. It doesn't replace Cicero. And there's your 2 texts. The Declaration of Independence is not a surprising one. Notes on the State of Virginia, I had to refresh my memory. I don't recall if I read it in high school or not. I knew the title. But Ronaldson has, when he gets to the German part of his book, English, not German, the people of the United States of America, in Congress assembled, we've now brought about a lot of decorative letters. So, we have to realize this is 40 years after the Declaration of Independence was written. So I'm sure there was something in the air celebrating that anniversary. Certainly a decade later there is. And I think he chose, we call a German type or Fraktur, because Declaration of Independence has started in engrossing script of that style, the first couple words. But then other people, like the Bruce Foundry in New York, we hold these truths to be self-evident. And there's a lot of, sort of promoting America as a place of liberty. And they will quote other people who they think are examples of liberty, like Simon Bolivar, who's considered the liberator of South America, and Garibaldi later, who helped, create Italy as a country. You sort of wonder why those names pop up in American books, but I think it's because they're looking for people, who, are part of this outlook on what, political institutions ought to be. Hager was another early foundry in New York. And what you've got is, once again, when in the course of human events, it's a much longer part of the text because it's smaller type. One advantage of smaller type, if you want to try to identify a text in a book, is you've got more of it to work with. If Google doesn't get you on the first try, you can try other sections. So the second text that shows up a lot, especially with the Bruce family, is Thomas Jefferson's Notes on the State of Virginia. And I just thought, I know the book where he talks about Virginia and its geography and stuff, but apparently there's a part where he talks about Virginia as the first government to be determined by the people, because Virginia as a state was created with a constitution before the American Revolution. And so you'll see notes of Virginia, not just in the Bruce Foundry, but in a number of others. And he starts out with Virginia, which I am myself a native, and then you can see he says, "Now the first of the states, but I believe I may say the first of the," well, you're missing the rest until you get down below. And it's weird to see, this in condensed sans serif. And then in the middle of it, you've got the Declaration of Independence, when in the course of human events. And you've got the American flag, and that means 1776. So that leads us to patriotism and chauvinism. The Americans are not alone in this. Everybody likes to tout their country, their literature. Here we've got Johnson and Smith, who became McKellar Smith's in Jordan, which was the biggest type foundry in America and maybe in the world in the late 19th century. It was a whole city block, 6 stories high. And there you've got, once again, Thomas Jefferson at the top. And then you have something all about how they admire the conduct of Tsar Peter. It might have been when he freed the serfs. And you find some really blatant plugs for liberty with dollar signs, but 1776. That's New York in the 1820s. This one is just a pamphlet from a printer's warehouse. So printers began to sell things beyond type, printing presses, coins, reglets, guillotines, all sorts of things. And later on, they began to actually show you that stuff. At this point, they just tell you that if you want some of that stuff, they've got it. And this particular printer's warehouse was a small foundry. And they also sold other foundries type. But this is one of 2 pages where they list all the first 7 American presidents and have quotes from their inaugural addresses. They're not in chronological order. They kind of jump around. So you don't have all 7 here. There's a couple on the right-hand page that I'm not showing you. I think Boston was probably the most patriotic of all the cities. My wife says, well, New York was a commercial place. I mean, New York even, was kind of sort of on the side of the South during the Civil War because they were business people. But Boston, was where the revolution started, and Boston always makes a big deal. And they're the only people I found, who even talk about the Civil War. That's a strange thing. But here, we can find in an American one, the Confessions of Jeff Davis. He was the president of the Confederacy. This is after the war. Union Now and Forever. And I think Bold Privateer is another Civil War reference. And then in tiny type on the right, the assassination of President Lincoln. The only reference I think I came across. And it must have been almost at that time. This is 63. He was assassinated. Oh, I forgot now. He must have added that page. I forgot what month he was assassinated. I think April. If you look carefully, you're going to see unconditional surrender. That was a nickname of Ulysses S. Grant, the leading Union general. He was he was U.S. unconditional surrender. So there he is, Lieutenant General Grant, but that line above it refers to him. I don't know what the camels refer to. I'm sorry. There's the other example of the assassination of President Lincoln, which is paired with the Fenian Brotherhood, which were people fighting for Irish separation from England, if I remember correctly. So I'm sure that's not an accent, because I'm sure there were Irish in the foundry in Boston. There's some other things in here. You can see we hold these truths. That's from the Emancipation Proclamation, Lincoln's famous speech that freed the slaves in the middle of the war. I have to check my notes on this one. This is Treviso, where this is a city near Cornuda where the Tipoteca is, and outside of Venice, if you don't know where Treviso is. But this is a very strange text, and I'm not going to try to translate it. I started reading it, and it was so weird. It's all about the customs of Englishmen shaking hands and doffing their hats but not kissing women like the Italians do. And there's a couple other pages comparing, manners in Italy with some other countries. This was the best of them. I think it was a criticism of the English, but why you would choose that. So as I said, there are other countries like to tout their heroes. Bolivar shows up in American Specimens, but here he is in a Peruvian specimen. And I think the people who set this specimen were Italians, because there's a lot of references to Italy in it. But Bolivar and San Martin are the two famous South American liberators. And then you've got down below, Cristobal Colon. Colon is not a name you might know unless you know Spanish. That's Christopher Columbus. So despite today's views of Christopher Columbus, he was a big hero, not only in America, but obviously in South America and certainly in Spain. On the right, you're seeing a number of references to Italian authors. Ugo Foscolo, the cathedral, famous cathedral in Milano, Alessandro Volta and his electrical experiments. Francisco de Rimini was some sort of Italian tragedy of the day. This German one has, of course, the Ring of the Nibelungen. Wagner, Richard Wagner is who you're going to have if you want to promote somebody at this point. And Hans Sachs was an older English, German writer who we came across when we did our black letter type of national identity. I now have forgotten what he wrote. And of course, Albrecht Dürer is a name you should all know. So everything there is promoting the Germans. History and politics, current events. Here we've got Fournier, and he has a whole bunch of pages referencing various Roman emperors and stuff. Here's Claudius from that BBC performance, I, Claudius, uncle of Caligula, who succeeded. Here we have somebody named Aspasia. I looked up Aspasia. She was involved with, I believe, well, Cyrus was the king of the Persians. Oh, she was the concubine of Artaxerxes, if you remember Artaxerxes. So she's in both texts. If we're British, we have to have Lord Nelson. And the other two names, if they don't ring a bell to any of you, were also important naval heroes in the wars against Napoleon. Back to Ronaldson. This is an amazing specimen. This is not 1816 to 1822. Because in this specimen, as you'll see later, he says that I don't want to set my text in Latin because my customers are going to be using English. Then he sort of backtracks and he says, well, I'm going to have like one line in Latin so you can compare the Latin to the English for the same typeface. But the people he has in this book are astonishing. This guy here, Speech of Logan. Logan was an indigenous chief. I mean, the most astonishing thing to see here. And he made some letter to Lord Dunmore appealing to the white man for to live up to treaties and stuff. But also you'll find in that book, let's see if I can find there's Jonathan Swift, Samuel Johnson, Edmund Burke, all British. Thomas Paine, the rabble-rouser during the Revolution, Simon Bolivar, Declaration of Independence, the Charter of Privileges that William Penn, the Quaker, had for Pennsylvania, and abolition of slavery in Pennsylvania, 1822. This German one surprised me because, see, where is it? Oh, yes. It's a famous German battle in 1683, and he was a general. So these names may not mean anything until you look them up. This one is all about the Franco-Prussian War, which was very fresh, 1870, and where the Germans defeated the French, and this is one of the battles where they defeated the French. I think this is the one where there was a surrender that essentially ended the brief war. And you can see there's a date, 24th of November, 1870. This one astonished me. Read it. Prussians kill. It's in a wood type specimen by William Page, who's famous for his chromatic types. This is a black and white tiny specimen. I think he's making a statement about the Franco-Prussian War. He's on the side of the French. There's no other explanation. This is a very strange specimen. The pages are transparent. And they're very flexible, but they're very strong. So if you're seeing through the pages. And there's mention of this guy who was a Japanese count who was an ambassador to France at the time. This is around, we don't know the exact date of this. Dan Reynolds and I keep arguing over the date. 1914, 1922, 1919. I was hoping that the life of this Japanese ambassador would help me, but it didn't succeed. He was famous, but this is a very strange one. This is German, and they've got Sir Jefferson Davis. That's the president of the Confederacy. He was not a Sir. And why they put him and not Lincoln, I mean, the Germans, as far as I know, didn't get involved in the Civil War. I know the British and the French did. But then you've got the Confederation of the Southern States, and you've got Greeley, misspelled, who was a newspaper guy in New York. Franklin, of course, Benjamin Franklin, who a lot of non-American specimens like to put in. And, of course, Abraham Lincoln. And Columbia, by the way, is another name for the United States in the past, not so much anymore. And at the top, you can see two generals on the Union side, Grant and Sherman. At the bottom of that, 3 lines. This wood-type specimen in Italy has a lot of people that seem kind of obscure. Umberto I was the first king of Italy, but then it turns out that Salvati, that was the name actually of the type founder, wood type, but Pier Marini was an architect at the time, and Antonio Rutilli was also a contemporary writer. For a surprise, Emigre Type Foundry, Rudy Vanderlans, who's a fabulous designer of specimens. This is my favorite. He did a small one to promote some of their types, and he and I guess Susanna visited historic sites in California, both being emigres, and he put the texts about the sites with photographs he took and made this sort of pastiche 19th century design, late 20th century, early 21st century digital design. So you can see the Republic of California in the spread that I chose out of the specimen. We're going to see Gutenberg inventing printing and a lot of things, but here I've got the statue of Jean Hachette, which in the Battle of Freiburg in this Parisian specimen. And the Battle of Freiburg was a battle in the 30 Years' War. And the statue of Jean Hachette was done in 1851, which kind of helps you date this. This is 1883. Apparently Jean Hachette was part of the French resistance to the siege by Charles the Bold, the Duke of Burgundy, back in 1472. I mean, I'm assuming French people knew this stuff. Didn't have to look it up like I do. William Henry Harrison was the president. He had been in the Mexican-American War in the 1840s. He's famous for being inaugurated and catching a cold on inauguration and dying 30 days later, which we are hoping might be repeated if the election does not go the right way. And I wondered, what was North Bend, Ohio? Well, that was his birthplace. And this is the date of his inauguration, not his death. So we can kind of date this specimen. This is one of my favorites. I was looking at the specimen down below. That's the easy to read part, and I saw $5 reward for the return of a little girl who was stolen about 3 weeks since, from her mother by her, I guess, estranged husband. And I went on Google newspaper search. I found the actual ad. It was from December of 1849. The specimen was dated 1850. So there's the comps just reading a newspaper and going, what a crazy story. Let's put that in our specimen book. This is a similarly crazy one. That's why I blew it up for you, because you can read it. A woman named Weiss attired herself in man's apparel in Newark, New Jersey, and undertook to thrash a Mrs. Miller, who apparently was seeing her husband. When her husband, Mr. Weiss, came along and discovered a man beating a woman, interfered and gave his wife, who he thought was a man, a sound whipping before he discovered the mistake. And this is in several newspapers. It must have been in the Boston one, because this is a Boston specimen. I found it in a couple others, and it may be that the Boston newspaper just isn't digitized. I'm sure they didn't find it in a New Jersey newspaper. Going back to South America, this is an Argentinian specimen. It's full of patriotic references. Not just obvious people like Jose de San Martin, but people I would never heard of, Irigoyen and Romero. These were like all like ministers and stuff in the government, like the Minister of Public Health and like weird things. But they also have very strange names for their typefaces. It also suggest, being proud of being South American. They name some of the typefaces after like rivers and cities and stuff in South America. Here you can see a text that talks about giving, the first one says that people who are born to slaves are free. Not the slaves, just those born to them. And then later they had a law, this is Brazil, where they freed everybody. So both of these are in here. So I think some of these suggest, political, biases on behalf of the founders. We have to have self-promotion. That little guy is from a Fournier specimen, thanks to a digital version from Stefan Elbaz. This is from the person I'm investigating right now, Louis John Pouchet. You'll see some letters of his on that poster. He's famous for very ornate letters, but this specimen of his, which is 1819, St. Bride's digitized it, he includes in it a letter from a Bath newspaper that says how great his typefaces are. And I just recently talked to people in Bath who found the actual paper with that letter. It's a real letter, it's not a fake. So he's got Cicero, Quousque, of course, and then he goes into self-promotion. This is Thorogood after buying Thorne's Foundry, and he wants people to know that it's going to be the same, good quality type, etc. And there's many references to this in several specimens by Thorogood. So you can see he's going to do it with the same spirit as before. This is the Bruce Foundry, and you can see the Declaration of Independence. You can see Shakespeare, but you also see that he keeps referring to things that they sell, not just their name. They have cases, stands. Then later on, they tell you, this is not wood type, this is metal, and it's cheap. Beautiful typeface. This is James Connerson, another important New York foundry. And this is out of a German specimen, mentioning Connerson. I have no idea how that would, how they, do that. Cleveland Type Foundry, it's a beautiful typeface, this one. It shows, I think it's been copied by some other type founders. But they are making sure you know that they've designed this typeface. They have like 7 or 8 pages in a row talking about how great it is. And everybody tells you that their typeface is the hardest, most durable typeface ever cast. I'm getting so tired of seeing those phrases. But this is special because this is self-spacing type by Lynn Boyd Benton, Morris Fuller Benton's father, who invented a machine for engraving type pantographically. But he also did this self-spacing thing. And not only does it show up in his own specimen book, I found it in, I think, a French specimen book recently. But he talks about this page after page. Keeps reminding you, I've invented this. It's really good. Use it, please. He even has a 10-page section explaining how to use it. This is maybe the most promotional of all. This is, 1921, but I think it might be in several issues of monotype specimen books. They're not dated, but they go on. They'll have a page of just showing you some boring text, and then they'll have a page telling you how great the monotype machine is. Then boring text, then great machine. Back and forth for like 80 pages. I just chose 2 of them. They're trying to explain to you why you should use monotype and not foundry type. And boy, they just really drill it into your head. I mean, whoever was this copywriter, he was damn good, I have to say. He didn't just repeat himself. Then again, you could avoid posters if you can use Bradley, which was an American typeface. Or the Morgan Press. The Morgan Press was a business that bought up wood type in the 20th century. And they had a collection in the 1960s, which designers like Herb Lubalin and Milton Glaser and others used. They would simply make proofs for you. So they weren't selling you the wood type. And then they hooked up with a photo company to make the type, to make photographic versions of their types. But this one I love, Oh, Empire, which is New York's nickname, the Empire State. Oh, this type is wood. The text may have been written by one of the Pushpin studio people because John Alcorn designed the specimens. And they're terrific. There's references to the Morgan brothers, to their wives. Doug and Lloyd were the brothers. You don't see one of the wives that's on another page. And it says, they're nice types too. It's a little bit of humor. And the pages change color. There's colored paper in these specimens, at least this one. This one by Farmer and Son, they refused to join ATF, American Typefounders, when it was created in 1892 as this giant monopoly. And they ran some ads. They're not specimen books, but they're specimens or types. And you see it says antitrust. They kept saying, we're not part of the trust. Printers, trust or no trust is your stake. And the trust, coercion, not business. I mean, they're really promoting that. But it's not in any of their specimen books. It's very strange. It's only in some of their ads in printing magazines. Now, I've mentioned McKellar, Smith, and Jordan, and we're going to kind of finish with them. Thomas McKellar took over the head of the Johnson Foundry in, I think, the 1850s with three other people, because it's called McKellar Smiths, plural, and Jordan, because there were two guys named Smith. So they just got shoved together as Smiths. But McKellar was a poet and a guy who really wrote the text. We know he wrote texts. And he wrote all sorts of crazy texts. A lot of them are a little bit, not appropriate anymore. A lot of them are hilarious. But this one, he's talking about printing techniques. So any person appropriating without previous permission any design of type or cuts patented by a type foundry shall forfeit the respect and confidence of honorable men. And I'm sure the designers in the audience can appreciate this sentiment. And at the top, so it's tiny for me to read. Whenever any person may feel disposed to criticize the style of any new designed type, cut, or ornament, he should remember that the founders seek to meet the varied tastes of typographers. So if you don't like it, somebody else might like it. Printing history is an area covered by Alistair Johnston in Alphabets to Order. He looked only at British and American sources. I've got some sources beyond that. But this is Zada in Venice in 1794. And for like 40 pages, he has a history of printing. I mean, he stops with contemporaries. So it doesn't go very late. And he's talking about Garamond here. Thorogood has a text which Alistair talks at length in his book. Of all the discoveries which had been made, we conceive of the printing, as the one that has made culture and civilization possible. And the question is where it came from. Probably Philip Luckham, his book on printing from 1768. And here's an American doing the same text, possibly copying the British for the idea, not looking at the original. Here's the original text in Luckham on the left. And then on the right, actually it's on the right in the script. On the left, you've got a discussion of who was the creator of printing. That's a big deal back then. Gutenberg, Schoeffer, Faust, as they called him, or Fust, or Coster in Holland. Here's Figgins talking about history of newspapers. This one, which is all about printing, I like the increased fatness in job letter as an improvement, but is it not in many instances carried to an extreme? So here's like a little criticism, but they're still doing it. How many of you knew that John Batchelor's first name was Thomas? I have no idea where these people got their history from. There's no Thomas Baskerville. Here's Charles Babbage, the early computer guy. Here's my favorite, the Bruce Foundry Specimen 1882. Almost the entire, 316 pages of type before ornaments is all about the history of printing. It's bibliographical references, it's little trivial nuggets, and it certainly goes against Lawrence Coster. But earlier specimens by the Bruce Foundry didn't. And I think that in researching this book, the author of these texts is probably Theodore de Vinci, who was considered the best American printer before Updike. And I found some scraps at Columbia that match some of the text to kind of prove it. They're not dated, they're just in a box of things by de Vinci. But you can see the Psalter, Letters of Indulgence. On this page I chose Peter Schoeffer. There's Coster on the right-hand page, on the left column. But this is my favorite page. You have to read it across. So Dibdin is a French book collector, and John Faust is Johann Fust, the financial sponsor of Gutenberg. And Foulis, F-O-U-L-I-S, are Scottish printers everybody admired. But here we find similar things in German, Aldus Manutius, Charles Derrier, who was a contemporary in France. This is from 1940s. It's a parody, I think, of the Bruce specimen. You'll see all these little tidbits, and all of a sudden you get to the right-hand page. It says, after digesting dates and data that lead to, we have this outburst, and highbrow fellows like to quote data, and it's obviously making fun of de Vinci and Updike. Herb LeBallon and ITC did a fabulous specimen inside of one of the issues of UNLC in color with quotations all about different aspects of loving letters and type. These are multiple quotes. You can see there's Gotthard de Beauclerc, Walter Tiemann, both German, Hugo Lagerström, Swedish. There's practical advice, how to treat wood type in a type specimen book of metal. Probably because a lot of these foundries sold wood type from wood type manufacturers. Sometimes identified, sometimes not. But it tells you how you should clean it, not warp it, etc. Then there's how to make ready, and some of these are taken from McKellar's book. This one I like. It would be well for printers to observe certain precautions relative to preventing the entrance into the mouth, and therefore into the stomach, and the whole system of type dirt. Disorders from which are far from uncommon. And then this is a poem that a number of, it was famous to printers. I've only seen it in one specimen. No more shall copy bad perplex my brain. No more shall type's small face my eyeballs strain. No more the proof's foul page create me troubles. By errors, transpositions, outs and doubles, no more my head shall ache from an author's whims as overrunnings, driving outs and ins. Anybody who set metal type will understand most of the language here. The Bonaparte is Louis Joseph Napoleon, 1848, 1860, and there's Coster below it. Very strange mix of people. And we're going to end with humor. This, I think, is intentional. How funny it looks to see a line without any space set. What is it? Between the words. These are parodies of Mother Goose. Luncheon for the King, 24 blackbirds baked, songster's chorus and a pie. And there's several of these that talk about the little old woman in a leather mansion, which is, of course, her shoe. And the grand inquest is who killed Cock Robin. But the guy who seems to have made humor part of specimens, and I can't really find humor in other specimens besides Americans, except what I saw on Saturday at the British Library, is Thomas McKellar. So squeezing, condensed typeface, squeezing crammed audience, crushing crowded rooms, exhibition, fat girl, I'm sorry for the sexism, mammoth squashes, meaning fruit, expanding childhood. I mean, he likes to play with the styles of the type, but also he played with making fun of politicians, making fun of different ethnic groups, Irish especially, making fun of men and women, artists, all sorts of people. And here he's got Boulder. I'm sorry, this is wood type. So there are people copied McKellar. You can almost see some of his exact copies, or you can see people just trying to be as funny as he is, and most of them fail. So I think this sample on the no, this is this one is ringing shots heard round the world, typefounders artillery, newspaper bombarding, magazine explosions, penny-a-line squibs, 1900-pounder editorials. So he's describing newspaper articles and headlines in military siege terms. And he likes to make up funny names. Dr. Quackham's infallible elixir, Madam Laugh Atom, Star Reader, Teacup Expounder, Thief Detector, Sweetheart Finder, Greenhorns Enlightened, interviews not granted to unbelievers. You could do an entire book on McKellar's texts. I'm just quoting a couple. Gabble fast, loose speech, interminable yarn spinner, an inveterate rumor weaver, perambulating dictionary, Timotheus Goodhart, Amarinta Mincing-gate, teacher of polite waddling and Humpty Dumptiness, promenade attitudinizing. Or this is somebody imitating him. Bivalvus gutta percha clams baked, delicious vegetable soup course, choice flavored game tidbits, imported boned, he fleas stuffed with gnats. Insomnia at midnight, well, of course, after that meal. And we've got, of course, probably the best specimen of the 20th century, Cassandra's specimen for his typeface beaver, where after showing the face, he then says, but danger. It's not readable. Do not use it like this. Though pentagram did. And my last slide is, I think, an unintentional bit of humor from an Ohio wood type manufacturer. Thank you. It's not his initials, so I don't know if bullshit was a common phrase in the 1870s or not.
Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you all so much for coming. We've slightly overrun, but it was fantastic content, so I'm very happy for you to have done that. We've probably got time for like a couple of questions. Have you got the energy for that?
I have the energy.
I've got a couple online, and then I'll
me.
come to the room. So thank you. We've had quite a few online, so apologies if I don't get through every question. Jeremy Tankard has asked, when did type specimens start to be designed by designers rather than just printed galley settings?
Well, certainly Cassandra's was designed by him, and I think Fred Gowdy designed his in the 20s. Mm-hmm. And I don't think, I'm not sure if Paul Renner designed Futura. He wrote an essay about the typeface, which is quite tedious. My guess is it would be the probably after World War I. George Oriol, though, I looked at a French specimen recently, and I think he designed the pages, but a lot of the pages were not his typeface. But I don't know much more. I just saw them like last week in Paris.
Okay.
But yeah, I didn't show that much 20th century because the texts become really part of graphic designs. I mean, there are texts, but they're like ads for cars or perfume companies or airplanes. So it's a different type of specimen that begins to happen, especially after World War II. If you look at Nebbiolo or some of the American foundries.
Great, thank you. Sorry, I'm just checking all the questions. We've got from Alex Cameron, thanks Paul, great and forensic work as always. In many ways, there is fundamentally little difference between where your talk began and work today in terms of type specimens. I'd be interested to hear from any type designers and yourself about what the balance emphasis they would put on inspiration for development of, and finally the marketing, the typeface through specimens. Sorry, I'm just trying to scroll as I speak. And finally, marketing the typeface through the specimens. Sorry.
Well, I mean, I showed you where they were promoting their typefaces. And I was just looking this afternoon, actually, at a Shanks specimen from 1902, and they would have pages saying, this type is a great type. You should be using it. It's really good for this purpose. And then they show you the type on the next page. So that, I guess that's, to me, that's marketing.
Yeah.
I think it's self-promotion. So, I think the first time I start to see foundries talk about themselves is in the early 19th century. Mm-hmm. I mean, Thorogood puts his name, especially Thorne's, into his books. He just throws a name in, or says the Fan Street Foundry, the Bruce people in New York, keep reminding you that it's their specimen. A lot of people do it. They want you to know, in case the cover gets lost, or something, that this is their type specimen.
Great, thank you. Sorry, there was another part to the question, but I'm having trouble scrolling on Zoom, so...
try somebody else.
Yes, I will do. Anyone in the room have a question? At all? No.
No, come on.
No? Anyone?
I've answered all your questions?
Or is that a question for the pub? Maybe that's what it is.
Or I've just tired you out.
Was there one more online we can do, and then we will definitely finish. Still having issues finding the other questions. I also wanted to say that I've just been asking our fantastic archivist Alicia on a message how many type specimens we have in St. Bride, and we definitely have over 12,000 in the building, and probably more because we've got a lot of single sheets. So we do say we have the biggest collection in the world. I think that's undisputed so far. So come to me if you know differently. But I'd just like to say a huge thank you to everyone online for joining us, and everyone in person as well. It's been a really fantastic evening, and thank you so much to Paul for delivering a really insightful talk. Thank you all very much, and another round of applause. And if anyone would like to carry on the conversation after this evening, some people will probably be going to the Crown and Sugarloaf pub, which is just on Bride Lane, just out of the doors, down the stairs, and sort of just near Fleet Street on the right. So thank you all very much, and thank you, Paul. Cheers.
Thank you. Oh.